Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. You're listening to Meeting of Minds, and our guest today is Derek Kreifels, who is the head of an association of state financial officers, treasurers, sometimes auditor general, etc. And his organization is really, I would say, at the front line. His organization and his members are at the front line of the fight against the politicization and the ideological capture of the investing industry, frequently under the name of ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing. Derek, I should say, all your members are secretary. You're just Derek. Derek Kreifels, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jerry. It's an honor to be here with you.
What is your toughest fight right now? What is taking up your energy and focus and engagement at this moment in your ongoing fight?
It depends on which state we're talking about. In West Virginia, it's the attack on coal and oil and gas. In Louisiana, it's the attack on the Second Amendment. In Nebraska, it's an attack on agriculture and cattlemen. And in this, the thing that I know it's hard for people that aren't familiar with ESG to understand, but it's fingering out. It has all these fingers in all these different policy areas, and it's really starting to touch multiple areas of our life, of all of our everyday lives, and so it is like playing whack-a-mole. Every week there's something new that pops up that the folks on the left have figured out a way to weaponize capital in a new way. And so, in the fall of last year, we started this by hearing about this IRS snooping rule. I don't know if you remember, there was this proposal that was in the Green Book, which is the book of ideas that comes out from the Treasury Department under a new administration. One of those ideas was we can have the IRS report, or have banks across the country and credit unions report every transaction of $600 in or out of someone's bank account to the IRS, so they could understand who wasn't basically being honest on their taxes, in an effort to produce higher tax collection revenues, which we heard about the proposal, and that was really the first time that our treasurers jumped to action. They said, this is unheard of in America, that you're basically presumed guilty,
yes,
until you're proven innocent. And we just thought it was one of the largest attempts at an invasion of privacy that we'd ever seen by our American federal government. And so
there's no probable cause for the surveillance. It's like almost being able to put a wiretap on your bank account.
Absolutely.
Just because you exist.
Absolutely. And aside from the administrative issues that it created for the banks and the credit unions, they were against it. We took a couple of weeks and said, okay, all of our state members, we need you to go out into your communities and talk to every blogger, every radio show, every newspaper, every TV show, and get the word out that you've got to call their congressman. And, there wasn't a specific bill. It was weird because there wasn't House Resolution 2349 or anything like that we could point to. We just knew that it was an issue that was being actively debated and discussed between administration officials and leaders in Congress. I think
that would be House Bill 459 probably would be. Wait, what is it? Fahrenheit 451. House Bill 451 would be the proper number for that one.
Probably.
If you have nothing to fear. If you have nothing to hide, if you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide. Sorry, I'm mangling the lines, but I mean, I'm not for tax cheating, but a gigantic surveillance state seems to be not the right reaction.
It really was, and so our treasurers took to national media, started talking about it, and that led to the next thing, which was this. We saw the administration again in this effort to weaponize capital. They started trying to slip in appointees to different positions that seemed irrelevant to most Americans, like the office of the comptroller of the currency. They put up a nominee. Her name was Soleil Amarova. She was a self-proclaimed socialist. That's not my words; those are hers that are on video, talking about how the Russian system of banking was far superior than America's. And so when we heard that the administration was appointing someone like that, this is before Russia invaded Ukraine, right? I mean, this is way before that. We said, this is ridiculous. We can't have a socialist in this position that's going to do the right thing for American banking. Um, and so we were very much opposed to her. We were involved with Sarah Bloom Raskin's nomination to the Federal Reserve. Here's someone that had worked at Treasury under President Obama. On paper, she had a good resume if you just looked at the Treasury experience. But if you looked deeper and you saw the political activism in the name of global climate change and the things that she was trying to do, and then you saw the systematic, all the other ways that the administration was trying to appoint people to play in that global climate change, even if the agency had nothing to do with it. We just thought that was appalling, and so our organization again and our members went all in on trying to make sure that she was not sworn in, and we were victorious with several federal national partners that were all working together to basically educate Americans about that.
I think there's a particular vulnerability with banks, and as I look at proposals or political statements, the banks have been ideologically captured probably earlier than any of the other national companies. And I think it's because they're not just they're highly regulated, but they're also under direct oversight. So most companies are regulated, but at a bank, a big bank, there's somebody who works for the federal government who's got a desk there. They're there every day, right? And so there's an oversight function which essentially makes them in danger of being directly under the control of the federal government. So when you look at the sectors that have gone most ideological, it tends to be the sectors that are most vulnerable. At the more local level, utility companies, because they're highly regulated. They're given a monopoly by government in many cases. So it's like, well, what do we get? There's no free lunch here.
I think that's very true. And Jerry, if I could, I've got a couple examples of how banks have played, have gotten very political. Just a couple of years ago, Treasurer John Schroeder in Louisiana, he started paying attention to the way that the comments and the things that were being done by a couple of the largest banks in America towards the Second Amendment. And he basically he's a veteran. He's very much a Second Amendment enthusiast, and said, if I'm in a position where I'm going to be doing business, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of business and contracts with banks, I'm certainly not going to work with a bank that wants to limit my state citizens' Second Amendment rights. And so he did that, and he made a lot of national headlines for it. And then in Missouri, Treasurer Scott Fitzpatrick, there was an interesting situation with a small nonprofit in rural Missouri that was having a well-known, the son of a well-known former president of the United States that was coming in to speak. And the payment processor was a payment processor called WePay. And they said that the speaker violated their hate speech and anti-terrorism policy, is what they ended up telling the organization on why their assets had been frozen for ticket sales. We'll come to find out WePay was a subsidiary of JP Morgan Chase. And so Treasurer Fitzpatrick that night went on Tucker Carlson on Fox News and said, made the announcement that they were no longer going to be doing business with JP Morgan Chase if JP Morgan Chase was going to continue to discriminate against the conservative half of the population of Missouri. Amazingly, JP Morgan Chase called the treasurer, I think that next morning, and everything was cleared up. But we're seeing it over and over and over.
That's the power of speaking up.
That's the power of speaking up. And for the record, the banks are hearing plenty from the left on a daily basis.
Yes.
Right? Don't hear from good, American-loving, the conservatives and folks that care about this, but usually aren't burning the city down in the name of a
or public. Even liberals who think that corporations should stick to their day job.
Right.
Because there are a lot of liberals that really hate Like, oh, come on, black lives don't matter to you. You're a giant corporation. You're just blackwashing or greenwashing. A lot of liberals hate this stuff too. Um,
Absolutely.
and
When the IRS snooping issue came out, for example, we had liberals calling us for the first time in 10 years saying, I am adamantly opposed to this. I don't want the government to know how much medicinal marijuana I'm buying on a monthly basis. We had people calling saying, I don't want the government to know how much ammunition I buy on a monthly basis. It was from both sides. And it was really interesting to hear. I think,
although if it's the same person and they're both high at the same time, I might be a little concerned.
it was the same
If
person.
there's a really big
They
bill
were
for
different
medicinal
calls.
marijuana and a big bill for ammo, I don't want a surveillance state, but
They were different calls. They were
okay,
different.
good. All right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, over and over and over again, we're seeing, the weaponization of bank of banks of lending of capital in terms of investments from these companies like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard and that are trying to band together to push for global climate change and now we have companies that are pushing for protecting reproductive rights in corporations. We're hearing about more Second Amendment initiatives that are being proposed by.
Let's talk about the abortion issue because this is really fascinating. I mean, talk about yeah, mental gymnastics. I mean, these activists are trying to make the case that doing business in a pro-life state means that you're going to have a shortage of workers because women aren't going to want to live in these states where they can't get abortions, and so you're not going to have enough workers. I mean, are we kidding here? I mean, first of all, the population outflow
Yeah,
from hyper pro-abortion states like New York is amazing. The America is moving from north to south and from east west to center.
yeah,
Right, America is moving to pro-life states.
yeah.
So I agree that there might be a worker shortage, but it's not.
It's not,
It's not in the growing Sun Belt. Let me put it that way. And it's not abortion. Nobody's making that. I mean, a few activists for some company might say, well, if like for instance Duolingo here in Pennsylvania, some women work for the company said, well, if Pennsylvania passes abortion restrictions, I won't work for you. I'll move out of state. Yeah, really? Will you? I doubt it. I don't know anyone except the most extreme activist who would make a movement decision like that.
well,
But
it's very disingenuous, where you take some of the largest companies that are doing this. You know, we know. I mean, we're business savvy guys, Jerry. It's cheaper to pay for a 2-day trip to California than it is to, have an employee
maternity leave.
maternity leave for 12, 16 weeks. I mean,
Yes.
I hate to say that, but that's the honest truth.
An abortion in an Uber is going to run you about $1,000, $1,200.
Right. Plus a
Right.
flight, probably. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. If it's a flight, that's true. Right. So instead of an Uber, if it's not a nearby state. So what about 3 months maternity leave? Right. And also the cost of delivering the baby. But it's really fascinating to hear liberal groups like As You Sow Network pushing these proposals as early as 2019, basically arguing. I mean, these are people who've said, we need parental leave, we need maternity care, we need everything, but say, babies are expensive.
Yeah.
There's going to be a medical bill, to deliver a baby. So we probably better off not having them, better for business. It's amazing that they can make that argument given their rhetoric in the past. But I guess it's just ad hoc reasoning. They'll just make whatever argument they think arrives at their conclusion.
That's right. That's right. And now that Roe's been overturned, we fully anticipate seeing this much more widespread. We talked about in the past these 3 shareholder proposals for TJ Maxx, Lowe's, and Walmart. I very much foresee that number growing from 3 to hundreds next year.
Yes. Well, we need to be ready for it. And that's the other thing I'm thinking about. I think your members are now the Frontline.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, there's a basic formula here. The corporations go too far, right? They cave in. Not all these CEOs want to go hard left. They're just and some of them are just like pain avoiders. So we don't show up. We didn't say anything. We don't go to annual meetings. They go to annual meetings, and they're pushing all manner of of ideological crazy stuff. Someone leaks something to the press. One of your members says, hold on a second, they're asset managers for us. They do an op-ed, maybe Wall Street Journal, goes on Tucker. Now we've got a national thing going on. The next piece, I think, is then the shareholder engagement, which is, oh, you're hurting. We're owners in your company. I'm talking about retail or other funds. We're owners in your company. Look at all the pushback you're getting politically. How can you tell us this is risk management when you do all this left-wing stuff, when it seems like most of your risk right now is a backlash from conservatives? And add that, and then maybe a little connection with the employee resource groups for veterans and Christians. And then I think basically this tide gets reversed.
Yeah, well, and we're, a lot of our treasurers are working with members of their legislature to pass different pieces of legislation. Texas, West Virginia, Kentucky have all passed some, and Tennessee have passed some pretty big laws in terms of, anti-discriminatory laws. Like Texas has one against any company that's discriminating against the fossil fuel industry. They also have one in regards to companies discriminating against the Second Amendment industry. In West Virginia, their bill is aimed a little bit more at banks that are discriminating against fossil fuel companies. And Kentucky Treasurer Ball helped shepherd in a bill that is a $100,000 state contract bill, where basically if you want to do business with the state, it doesn't matter if you're a paper company or you're a fund manager. If your contract's worth over $100,000 and you're discriminating against the fossil fuel industry, you're no longer eligible to do business in Kentucky. So we see that as I think we'll see some of the more legislation in states. I think there will be some legislation that demands the Treasury take back the proxy votes from the fund managers, and so I think that will happen in some cases. It'll be kind of state by state. We've seen some governors do some great things. Governor DeSantis.
Maybe we look at the oligopolistic proxy industry too.
Right, very limited number of providers that work with state governments.
Two of them add up to maybe 95-97% of market share, and they are ideologically captured.
That's exactly right. So I think there's also a legal argument that's forming where Treasurer Ball just asked her Attorney General in Kentucky, A.G. Cameron, for a legal opinion on whether the idea of stakeholders could be considered a valid factor in determining an investment decision. So could a fiduciary use this idea of stakeholder capitalism, where there aren't just shareholders but stakeholders out there, i.e. activists who want the company to go a certain direction? Is that legal in a state like Kentucky to make investment decisions based on anything other than that sole fiduciary responsibility? And his strong opinion came out, and of course it was not legal to use any of those other factors. Well, I think we're going to see more.
Of course not. Where there's a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, how can you possibly demote shareholders and put them alongside with the union, the community, the suppliers, the planet, polar bears, social justice? I mean, it's a demotion of the shareholder, or it means nothing.
Right.
And it's interesting, there were a number of proposals last year where I actually asked a question at some of these board meetings where they had signed the Business Roundtable Pledge. Larry Fink, BlackRock, was leading this thing, arguing for stakeholder capitalism. So some activists came forward and said, oh, well, if you believe in stakeholder capitalism, then you have to become a public benefit corporation, because under law, you have to put shareholders first. But you're saying you're not putting shareholders first. All stakeholders are equal. That's in conflict with your legal status. Therefore, you have to change your legal status. And it's fascinating what these companies, Yelp in particular, said. And I even asked flat out, are you saying that your Business Roundtable statement didn't change anything? Yes. That's what we're saying. It didn't really change anything. It just reflects what we're already doing, which is putting shareholders first. So this stuff is either meaningless language, in which case they're misleading investors,
Yeah,
or it means something, in which case they're violating fiduciary responsibility and demoting shareholders. Who would want to be a shareholder in that situation?
I have no idea. I think you're going to see many more attorney generals across the country. We've developed great friendships with many of our treasurers and attorney generals in the same states. And I think that you're going to see them working more closely together to show where some of these fund managers are violating their fiduciary duties, their fiduciary responsibilities as fund manager for state pension and state tax dollars.
Hmm. I see. So right now you're pretty much focused on treasurers are your front line right now, and you're
Yeah,
saying now the attorney generals are kind of getting AGs are getting pulled into this.
I think so. I think
Good.
that's where it'll go. I think that you'll see states that will, I could foresee a multi-state class action lawsuit at some point that is aimed at a company that they feel like it's doing harm. Because again, we talked about this, Jerry, in the past that the returns just aren't there. I mean, the returns aren't equal to, if you take one portfolio that's heavily divested from carbon-based energies and one that isn't, the one that isn't is going to perform better than the one that's divested almost every time. And in some cases it's a percent, but you take a percent of billions of dollars over a period.
Compound it for 20, 30 years
That's
because a
significant.
pension plan. Yeah.
That's significant to the retiree or that pensioner that's trying to decide if they're going to have enough to live on when they turn 67 or 65 or however old it is when they retire.
Well, the problem with this approach is when you have an investment approach, you've got a proposition, which is you have rules. Now, it might be cap weighting, which is the market is efficient and it's properly valued these, or it might be a value discipline, buy low, sell high, buy when it's on sale, etc. There are different, could be earnings quality. There are all sorts of different methodologies, right? But those rules are designed to improve performance. If you take anything else and essentially shove it down on top of that, you're overriding rules that are well established as drivers of return. Like there's a lot of data that says when you buy companies with low PEs and hold them for the long run, you're more likely to make some money. There's also rules that say if they're high quality earnings, good return on assets, cash flow on assets, that over time that's adds to earnings. Now, maybe that's wrong, maybe that's right, but there's a lot of data backing it up. If you come along and say, "Oh, well, if you're doing something that's socially bad, we're going to override those established rules and impose political rules and then engage in the magical thinking that eventually your social justice sins will catch up with you." To the degree that those screens mean anything, they mean diminution of return. Or you had a bad approach to begin with.
Right.
In other words, whatever approach you had for managing money, if it's a value approach, well, if it's a good approach, then overriding it's going to hurt you. If
Yeah.
overriding it doesn't hurt you, then it was a bad approach. It's a no-win situation to impose ESG on existing
Right. And you talk
methodologies.
about the rules, there's been rules in this business for a long time, and it's been our experience that this group of climate activists can't get Congress to do what they want them to do. They can't get the Green
Right.
New Deal passed.
Right.
So they want to change the rules. They want to change the rules at every regulatory agency. We've been
Yes.
working hard to comment on every proposed rule change that impacts ESG or that introduces ESG into the process. And one of the big things too that we're seeing, and I know you visited a little bit with one of our members, Utah Treasurer Marlo Oaks. He successfully pushed back on Standard & Poor's Global that has decided to create a arbitrary political ESG score for state bonds, for state ratings. Here's Utah that's been a AAA rated state for 20 years. And because Utah is in a drought, they get a bad ESG score. And probably because they don't agree with the political philosophy of a majority of the elected officials that are in office. But they're not brazen and bold enough to say that. And so, the state of Utah, led with Treasurer Oaks and Auditor Dugal and the governor and Senator Lee, Senator Romney, all the members of Congress, pushing back against Standard and Poor's. Same thing happened in Idaho. We've got a great friend in Senator Mike Crapo and Idaho Treasurer Julie Ellsworth. They work together. They've actually been hosting ESG educational forums in Boise for the general public. They have
Wow.
television.
I didn't know that. Is that on your website? I'd love to see some of those decks if they're available. That's great.
They've actually got the whole forum on public television recorded. It was a great event. I had the opportunity to speak. I know they had Vivek Ramaswamy come in and several other great presenters. Julie Treasurer Ellsworth has been working really hard to make sure that the general public understands what ESG is and what it isn't.
Vivek has done a marvelous job.
That's great.
Raising public visibility on this issue.
I'm a big fan of his book, Woke Inc.
Yes.
If you really want to understand kind of ESG and where it came from, his book is great.
One other point about him, but it's also a point about you guys. I have a personal bias. I don't like conservative outrage from a distance. I understand that it's okay. You can go out there and speak at CPAC or whatever, or go on talk radio and say woke capitalism is terrible and CRT is terrible, and that has a function. But I'm so much more interested in people who are doing a thing.
Yeah.
Right. Not like building a mailing list.
That's right.
Appearing to do a thing. Right. So Vivek's doing funds. Right.
Yeah.
Your members are putting in comment letters. They're talking to these companies. Justin Danhoff is now with Vivek, but before with National Center, going to annual meetings. I want to feed oxygen to the people who are actually building institutions or guarding institutions and doing things, rather than just branding around the outrage.
That's right. I mean, for years, there's been several great organizations doing a lot of really good and great research on this topic. And the way that I describe to people is we're taking that research, which I would consider like the stick of the spear, and we're putting a tip on it. And the tip are these frontline state, treasurers and state auditors who have the relationship with their voters in their state. Some of these auditors and state treasurers got more votes than their governor did, or got more votes than their U.S. senator did. And so they're extremely respected and well known. And so one of the things that we're working on, we just won the Heritage Foundation Innovation Prize.
I saw that.
And we were very humbled to receive that.
Congratulations.
But we won it for a proposal that we're getting ready to roll out soon called Our Money, Our Values. It's an educational campaign to the general public to help the everyday person here in America understand what ESG is and how it impacts their everyday life, how it impacts inflation and prices at the grocery store, how it impacts the food supply chain, how it impacts the gas prices at the pump, and how it's impacting their bottom line when it comes to their retirement.
I notice Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, another do tank,
yes,
also received the same award. So I think Heritage is getting that,
yes.
that that the battle has shifted to some degree from politics to boardrooms.
Yes.
And that doer institutions need to have light shown on what they're doing.
ADF actually won because they have a new index that they're trying to get corporations to respond to surveys, much like the Human Rights Commission does. But this is basically an index based on how a company allows their employees and their teams to be religious freedom within the company.
Well, I'm working on composing a letter to the companies that I'm invested in,
that
I'm involved with, to say, we note that you haven't responded to this proposal. Do you care about diversity or not?
Yeah, I love Jeremy Tedesco and what they're doing there. It's great. I'm actually speaking at ADF next week about the state treasurer's work.
See you there.
Okay, good.
All right. Is there anything, Derek Kreifels from State Financial Officers Foundation, anything that we didn't cover that you want to bring up? Any questions I didn't ask that you think, gee, I wish, I was hoping Boyer would ask me
Just
about
say,
X, Y, Z.
everybody can connect with their state treasurer, right? Go to www.sfof.com, click on our financial officers. You can see if your state treasurer is a member or not. If they're not, ask them to. It doesn't cost the state anything for them to join our organization. You can follow us at Twitter at SFOF_states. And that's where a lot of our kind of breaking news, when we have a treasurer or auditor working on something significant, where we first put it. If people want to reach out to me, they can. I'd love to visit with them. I do think that Jerry, the only way we win this and really start to reverse it, everybody in the movement has got their part, but I really believe that unless we really help the people understand and impact, the hearts and the minds of Americans and understand how this is impacting their bottom line, I think that's going to be vital to help change the tide on this issue. So I am going to work tirelessly to continue to push and to educate every American, I don't care if they're liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican, on how important this issue is and how negatively it impacts them.
If these row officers, financial officers or other row officers, apart from like certain channels, like claiming unclaimed property or, college planning, there's certain channels for that. If you're going generally to their press office or their feedback, their inboxes are not filled.
Right.
They will notice if you are in a state and you write an email to them and you get 10 friends to write an email saying, hey, I was looking at the State Financial Officers Foundation. I notice that you're not involved with this. I heard an interview. They could even send a link to this interview, whatever, or a link to yours. Can you explain why you're not? Because it seems like important work. 10 is a groundswell.
That's right.
They will have meetings about it.
That's right. And we welcome any state treasurer, state auditor, regardless of political party, that wants to join in fight for economic freedom right now in the United States. And so, we would invite your listeners to do that. If they have questions, they can reach out to me as well.
Wonderful. Derek Kreifels from the State Financial Officers Foundation, thank you for being with us on Meeting of Minds podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jerry.
I'm Jerry Bowyer. Thanks for joining us.